Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Thanks, Scott. Yes, I'm excited to invite today's guest. You know, of all the guests that we've had so far on our podcast, I believe Brett has been the one I have known the longest. We actually went to school together back in high school. We weren't best of friends yet. We had a healthy relationship as far as respect for each other, knew each other, were good people. I have been watching Brett Judd now for a little while on Facebook, some of the things posting. I know he's a licensed clinical social worker, and he's been doing some good work with a lot of people and helping them with their mindset. You know, in the podcast, we talk a lot about that, where you're going with your money. It starts with in your mind and your team, and make sure they're the best. Well, your mind's got to be good, and Brett is very good at helping people getting where they are to where they want to go. So thanks, Brett, for being on the show.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I appreciate your invite.
So tell me a little bit, since we had not a ton of interaction, but we kind of saw each other almost on a daily basis till the day. What led you down this path to where you wanted to be doing what you're doing?
You know, that's really an interesting question, and I don't know the answer in a lot of ways, to tell you the truth. All through high school and, you know, getting ready to go to school, I was going to go into hotel and restaurant management. I wanted to be the owner and creator of exclusive dinner clubs. I had this whole track of where I wanted to go. When I was young, my family was in Seattle, and we went to a place that was just absolutely amazing. It was down in the warehouses on the docks, and we went upstairs into this absolutely beautiful restaurant, and big glass windows outlooking the sound. And I thought, I like this, and I just wanted to create that type of thing. Well, I came, you know, got ready to go to college, and I'm starting to look at things, and I'd had a couple of experiences that kind of shifted, that were basically like, you're really good at interpersonal, and you really have this intuitive way of helping people. And so I started looking at psychology, started heading down that direction. And then somebody said to me, you're a social worker. Why don't you come over? And like, what do you mean? And social work looks at the interconnectedness of systems, how one part of a family system or an individual's, you know, work environment, all that interplay with the person. I'm like, I love that. That's absolutely where I'm at and what I want to do. And I abandoned that dream of the restaurant entrepreneurship, and have loved doing this work ever since. So I don't know, it just kind of evolved, and I shifted from that one direction into here, and here I am.
Wow. And so correct me whether I'm wrong. I believe your spouse is with you in this venture. Is that correct?
She is also a therapist. She has a degree in counseling, and she has a small private practice, but we don't work together in our practices. But we have at times. But yeah, we're both doing the same kind of work. Years ago, we were working together. We put together actually a marriage program for entrepreneurs, because there's such a major problem, that interpersonal relationship inside the entrepreneurial world, and the havoc and chaos that it brings into the marriage. And so Gina and I put this Marriage is Worth Millions program together, and we're teaching it and coaching it several years ago. We had a local TV show here in the Pocatello area, in the local TV network. It was a lot of fun. So we have worked together and have seen a lot of things inside the money space that is damaged or hindered dramatically by the headspace.
Explain that a little bit further, the money space by headspace.
So, you know, I'll just tell you this quick story. There's a gentleman that I had an opportunity to interact with, a good friend of ours. He's a dentist, And he started a mastermind for dentists, helping them get out of their high income, business into true high net worth. And he invited us to come and help in the development and growth of that, because he was running into a lot of problems where he kept seeing a lot of emotional, mental barriers that these guys couldn't get over. And this gentleman, I usually call him Steve. He was a dentist. He was miserable. He was collapsing into a state of depression. His life outside of dentistry was miserable. And he was so blinded to the opportunity that our friend was presenting to him, and of any other option. Our friend has this saying. He said, he was head down and fingers wet, and he couldn't see anything else because work had just consumed him. And as I'm working with him, the mental barriers and the blind spots and the deep rooted fear of change had him so wrapped up that he couldn't see any other option. And I've seen that so many times in my clients and individuals that I'm working with. They're so afraid of letting go of one thing for something that may be dramatically better, because of the fear that change brings, because of the fear of transition, or because of these deep rooted, I have to do this. My dad was a dentist. My grandpa was a dentist. We're dentists, but yet he'd rather be out and be a mechanic because he works different with his. There's so many deep rooted emotional, mental barriers that keep people from moving into true wealth and potential.
How does one identify or self-diagnose that there's such blind spots, and that they need to come and see Brett? I mean,
Sure.
it's not. I'm assuming that it's not people that have complete mental breakdown and have an anxiety attack or attempt suicide. I mean, we don't want those people. I mean, what am I saying is we don't want people to get to that point to be able to recognize that they need to see you. What are some things that maybe the listeners are, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs, people that listen to this podcast, particularly those that are involved in investing in real estate. How do we know that we need to see you?
Well, one of the easiest ways is when you lay down at night, can you shut your mind off? Can you do it without, a few drinks? Can you do it without numbing out on TV? Or is your mind racing with thoughts about the next day, the last day, what I just did, worries about 2-3 months from now? Can you sit quietly in your own space and get out of your head for a minute? Because one of the things that I've seen repeatedly, and an indicator that maybe I need to go find somebody who can direct me, is this rampant mind chatter. We can't turn it off. There's always this stress, this anxiety. And so that's a great indicator that there's too much going on. I'm not doing any internal work to slow the thing down. And maybe I need to pause for a second. Now, if you can do that on your own and you recognize it, you can stop it, you can do a little bit of mindfulness connection and realize, come back to self, fantastic. But that's not a skill that many of us are taught. Most of us grew up with this, bootstrap, work hard, go to bed tired, get up the next day, work again. And eventually that doesn't work. So one of the things that I teach everybody, and it's a tool that you can use at any time, when you start finding yourself constantly thinking about and just something gnawing at you, if someone will pause just for a moment and catch it and say, man, why do I care about that? That one question, why do I care? Or why is that such a big deal to me? Or why do I have that feeling, that thought, that nag? That question is it's an amazing invitation to the subconscious mind to engage in a conversation. And that sounds kind of strange when I tell people, I want you talking to yourself. But what it's saying is, please tell me, what have I locked onto? What belief, principle, habit, attitude do I hold so important that I can't stop thinking about this? So going back to Steve, the dentist, When I asked him that question, he came back with this fear. I've invested so much into my dental training, into my practice. I can't let go of it. I know it's failing. I know it's not doing what it's supposed to. I can't pivot because I've invested so much, I'll be a failure. And so this deep rooted belief that it's not okay for me to fail, and I'm in it so far, I've just got to drive this thing as hard as I can, was making him depressed. It was causing anxiety. And so when we pause, when something comes up and we find ourselves reacting, why did I care about that? What is it about that? So many times what we're going to do then is find some deep-seated belief that's actually keeping us stuck in this space. And so that's a tool you can use, but really, I guess, back to the core of it, if you can't turn off the mind chatter, if you can't find something that isn't, chemical or a distraction to calm, slow down, and just come into a place of quiet, you need to be working with somebody to find that. Because the mind should be able to shut down, and that's when we do our best work. And that's the easiest way to know that it's time to talk to somebody.
So that when you say that's when we do our best work, are you saying like that's why we have ideas in the shower?
Yes.
Why we have ideas sometimes in the middle of the night is that's when we're at a state of relaxation?
Yes. Now, showering is an excellent example. I mentioned a minute ago that state of kind of a mindfulness. When you're in the shower and there's the rhythmic movement of the water, the sound, it's warm, you're in that private space, that is a very mindful moment. You're washing your body, you're touching yourself, you're coming back to self. And it's amazing how many times in that moment we will have brilliant ideas. All of a sudden the answer comes. And it's because we've been able to close out everything else and come back into that calm, quiet space. I tell people, imagine if you never took your foot off the accelerator of your car and now put the brakes on and try to come to a stop. If the engine doesn't relax, you're going to be in this constant chaos all the time. And that's where I find a lot of entrepreneurs find themselves. And then they get stressed, the conscious mind gets overactive, and then we're not able to do our best work because there's too much chaos.
Yeah, that makes sense, because when you're an entrepreneur, there's everything. I mean, you need to do everything. Yeah. Right? Some people start to say solopreneurs. It takes a while to get beyond that individual situation, right? To some degree, where you're the accountant, you're the HR person, you're the, supply, you're the go on and on and on, all the different hats that an entrepreneur needs to do that. I can see and have been in that situation where, at night I can say, very rarely do I mean, it takes a minute to shut off. It takes a minute to settle down to then go to sleep for the fact well, tomorrow's I've got to make payroll. We will collect enough overnight, will the credit card settle and everything to be able to make payroll tomorrow? That's stressful. You talked a minute with Steve having blind spots. What did you mean by that?
We get so fixated on this is what has to happen. This is the path that I'm supposed to be on. Or I've invested so much in this direction that I can't see anything else because I'm so focused on what I'm doing that anything else is irrelevant. One of the easiest examples of thinking about blind spots is when we're just sitting, and maybe your listeners, while you're doing this, we can sit on our offices or in our space and we don't notice the air conditioning fan most of the time or some other noise in the background. Because if the brain sees it as irrelevant to my current situation, it will isolate it away. And so someone like you comes along and you've got these ideas and these opportunities for them. Or my friend who was trying to get Steve into a better place with his practice, he was so blind to any other opportunity because all he could think about was where he was, that the brain just ruled it out and immediately dismissed it. And it's a common place to be, but it's a dangerous place to be, because then we miss opportunities because we're so focused on just what's right in front of us.
So you're referring to the reticular activating system, is that right?
Right, the RAS, the reticular activating
Right.
system, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about that. I'm fascinated. I read a book not so long ago. I think it was called Ask. I'm trying to remember the name of it. And they talked quite a bit about the RAS. And do you have mechanisms, or do you have ways in which you coach people to essentially train or retrain the RAS to help them versus going against them? Because like what you said a minute ago, it's almost as though the reticular activating system for Steve, for example, couldn't see something that was valuable for his fact he was so focused on something. How do you do that, and what's some of the mechanisms that you do to help people with that?
So one of the things, the very first thing, and there's ways that I do this, but you can also do it yourself, goes back to that question: why do I care about this? Why am I so fixated on this? What is so important about this thing that I can't lift my head up from it? We have to begin kind of questioning our space and our reality. I have another client that I'm working with right now, and he's one that we really do a lot more coaching than any kind of therapy, and that's why he came. He has built an incredible technology company. Very young, very dynamic individual.
So he's our
But
age, is what you're saying, right?
what's that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
he's very
sure.
young. Right, he's our age. Okay, I just want to be clear about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Mine is about 20. But he was losing his way. He was losing himself, and he no longer knew where he fit in his own company. And he was so fixated on the fact that he was a programmer, he was a designer, he was the creator, he was the fixer, that as his company had grown and he brought other people in to do those jobs, he no longer knew who he was, because he was
Wow.
still fixated. And that blind spot, the reticular activating system, ruled out any other option for him other than, I'm the guy that's supposed to be up at 2 a.m. looking at the servers, watching to make sure everything worked. But yet he had people in place for that. And he had redundant server systems that were doing that for him. And now he was lost. He didn't know who he was anymore. He didn't know his role and his purpose anymore. And so we had to then work on, what are the core beliefs that you have about yourself? Who do you believe that you are? What is your role in this? And ask some of those grounding personal questions so that he could come back to himself. And then we were, he's able to find his new path in it. But we get so outwardly fixated that we're lost until we come back in to figure out what it is that's driving us and what it is that's keeping us stuck in that space.
So like I described a little bit before we started that in describing the podcast, is about accumulating and enjoying and passing on wealth. And the ability to enjoy wealth is right in where you're talking about, because you could have that person or other people that you talked about too that have pretty significant amount of dollars, right? Yet they're poor in their ability to relax. They're poor in their ability to unwind or to unplug, poor in their ability to come home and truly be present with the kids, right? Or the wife, or the this or that. Am I understanding correctly?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And all of that then comes back to, again, that question: why can't I come home? Why do I need to be focused all the time? Why am I so stressed about the business? The business is going fine. And this individual I was just telling you about, this young man, one of the things, like, I can't fly anymore. I love to fly. I love taking the afternoon off, going to the airport, getting in the plane and flying. I can't fly anymore. And he had lost his ability to find joy in just the simple things, because his mind was so fixated on the business and security and all of the safeties there, that he was forgetting about the things that got him there. I have another individual, in really, I really like working with this guy. He fantastic. Now he is our age, and but
Yeah,
again, a very
younger.
highly successful individual who, his kids are now moving on out of the house. Um, Recently sold off a very, very well-established business. Um, did he's doing well. He's doing well, but yet because and this is where some of the blind spots come from, and this is where that RAS, the reticular activating system, finds its roots because of some things that happened to him in his youth and some principles that imprinted into his mind when he was 7 to 11 years old. While he made enough money, and this last winter we had so much snow, and where he lived, he was constantly digging out. He finally went and bought a tractor, and he'd always wanted a tractor with a front end loader so that he could do this work and didn't have to shovel it. He felt guilty for spending money that he'd worked hard for on himself because that's not something that you're supposed to do. And he came in excited that he bought this tractor, excited that he could finally get the snow moved quickly and that he was able to go help other neighbors. But yet he carried this guilt about spending that money because that was extravagant, that was wasteful. We don't spend money on ourselves. And he was really in a really tough spot with that. And so we had to go back. We had to find the root to that. We found an experience that he had and some things that had happened. And not like he's spending money free will, but he now totally enjoys what he's been able to amass in his life because we were able to unlock that underlying principle that was keeping him stuck. But he was open to it. Unlike, Steve, the dentist, this gentleman wanted to change that. He wanted to find it. He knew that there was a problem, and he was here for that purpose.
Wow. So how do you balance though there are supposed tos, and you know what I'm saying? There's things in society. I mean, there's laws. And for some people, the 10 Commandments are exactly that, right? You don't go around that. That's like basic laws for having a good society and civilization.
Right.
And yet you've talked about these supposed tos. We're all kind of conditioned as children, whether that's intentional or unintentional, by parents that I don't believe for the most part are attempting to handicap us or do things wrong for us. Yet that's the best they know how to do. I'll give you an example.
Absolutely.
I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad after I had finished my postdoc.
Mm.
And it took me a while, quite a ways into the book, and I realized, wait a minute, I've been raised by a man who's both. In practice, he was rich dad. In advice, he was poor dad, for the fact that what he'd been taught or what he'd been commercialized to do, that was the right thing to do. And I just stepped back and realized, you can't carry a grudge. You can't be angry. I mean, he did the best he knew how to do. I don't know anybody in my life that worked harder than my dad, but he was doing it for me, right?
Right.
How do you balance that, or how do you bring people to recognize those differences and where there's okay to make changes or to go against your conditioning?
Right. So there's a couple. You brought up a really important piece, and there's a phrase that's been around for a long time. It came out of some early psychology. Don't should on yourself, and you hear that a lot. But there are some shoulds that are absolutes that kind of go into that moral society. I should take care of an ailing parent. That's a reality. As we age, as our parents age, I really should be more compassionate or caring or be in that space, right? But then there are things like, this gentleman was telling you about a minute ago, that I'm not supposed to, I shouldn't spend money on myself. some of these things come inadvertently. If you think about a young kid standing in the line at the grocery store, mom's frustrated. He wants a candy bar. He wants one of the toys that are right there on the shelves at the checkout. And she's like, in exasperation, mom says something to the little kid about, what do you think? I have all the money in the world. I can just spend it on you. Now, she may be frustrated. Maybe she's at the end of the pay period. She's got to buy food for the family. Maybe she's crunched for time and had to get food for dinner to get everybody home to make dinner. But that one little statement, interpreted by that little kid, I'm not worth this. Mom can't spend money on me. Or we're not supposed to spend money on stuff like this. It can get scrambled in so many ways. And now it becomes a should. And that's exactly what happened to my client when he was a young kid. Mom said something in exasperation about spending money and his dad. And he interpreted it as a statement to him about being extravagant, about spending money, about being wasteful. When in reality, mom was expressing a statement about something totally different, but he heard it, internalized it, and now it became a should in his life that was causing him distress.
Wow, that's really cool. I'm not sure if I remember this completely right. However, I think one definition of an educated person is someone who can unlearn what they've learned and relearn with better information, right? Or more correct or more fulfilling. I don't know what's the right word there. I mean, sometimes we make decisions based on the information that we have at the time.
Yes.
And we may go a year or 2 years or 5 years and gather additional information and look back and say that was the wrong decision.
Right.
And not that we can sit and beat ourselves up over it. However, we need to have that recognition that we made the best decision we could at the time.
Yeah.
And so some of that is, okay, I had that interpretation as a child. We really don't know whether, mom's actual reasoning for saying it. We can surmise it. However, we can say, well, there's other possibilities that would have been other than my interpretation. Now I can make a new interpretation and build to the next level.
It's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Absolutely fascinating. I love that. Brett,
can I build on that for a second?
Sure, go ahead.
Because I think in this, how do I know which is a good should, bad should, if it brings conflict, if you find, any kind of stress or anxiety, man, I should really do that. Oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to do that. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. If there's any kind of conflict or consternation or anything inside associated with it, that needs to be looked at. We need to stop for a second. Why do I feel so compelled that I should do this? Why is this bringing me so much conflict if I'm supposed to? Because if we have that conflict, that internal conflict, that means that there's a dissonance. It isn't working for me where I'm at in my life or how I believe in this situation. And that's a huge indicator that maybe there's something that is amiss. And one of the examples I use all the time is the orchard that we have at our house. And if I don't prune those trees every year, they get overgrown, they're a mess. The apples that they produce aren't as good because there's too many. But it doesn't mean that the apple tree itself is wrong or bad. So maybe the core principle that produces the should isn't bad. It's just become overgrown. We haven't tamed it. We haven't pruned it. We haven't refined it to now it moves us and works with us. Instead, it's consuming and it's overwhelming. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit back and like, whoa, what is this conflict in me? And when you're saying here's a principle, maybe I worked with it. My question that I throw out to clients a lot, and it's kind of fun on my side, but I like, well, is it true? And you just kind of get a little, sassy with it. You're like, huh, is it true? Because maybe there's a principle, a belief, or a core value, a should that was imposed or you picked up, or maybe it worked at a time. Is it true now? Is it true in this situation? Was it true for my grandparents coming out of the Depression that they needed to save every plastic bag? That there was a drawer at my grandma's house that had every rubber band that had ever come home from the grocery store or off the newspaper? Well, when you come through a period of time like the Depression, straight into the World War II and rationing, yeah, it was true that you need to save everything that might be reusable. Now, is it true for us today? I mean, maybe it's frugal and it's, good practice, but is it necessity for survival? No. So some things were true at one time out of necessity that are no longer true today, but yet we've held them, we've picked them up. Generationally, they've been given to us. They don't work for us today. And those things we have to assess and analyze. Otherwise, they get us stuck. And then we find ourselves in anxiety, stress, we get depressed, and we're not able to function the way that we'd love to function.
I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here, and because a question came to my mind. I've heard someone say that anger turned inward is depression. Would you agree with that?
It can be. Depression is a very interesting, space. There are those people who, for whatever reason, the body doesn't make enough dopamine, it doesn't make enough serotonin. There is an imbalance chemically, and they need a small dose of an antidepressant. Then there are those who, because they've held on so much, because they're internalizing and repressing the release of some of this chaos, the body can't handle it.
Okay, so can we say that they're shooting themselves so much, right?
Oh, yeah.
And when you first said that, I was like, dude, don't swear. Don't shoot on yourself. And I said,
don't shoot on yourself.
This is not a mature podcast.
This is a G-rated show.
No. So they're sitting around shoulding, or you shouldn't do this, you should do that, you should do this. And the reality is they're not doing all those things.
Yes.
That it causes the anger, that causes them to turn back in on themselves to do that. And so some of that is just simply, well, and I love your question. So let's say I shouldn't spend money on myself, or the fact that your example is the gentleman you're talking about.
Right.
We had one of the biggest snow years that I know of, right? At least during our lifetime this last year. And so here's this guy digging out all the time. Well, I shouldn't spend money on myself. Yet you go out there with a shovel and manually deal it, break your back, have problems, has the money. I mean, it was nothing financially to write out a check or swipe a credit card to get what he wanted, right?
Absolutely.
That shouldn't. And then you say, well, why is it so important that I shouldn't buy a snow machine or whatever it was? And that's what you're saying is in that moment is what asking, why is that important? Why is that so important that I have?
Where did this come from? Thought? Why is this so important? Why have I locked onto this? Any of those why, what kind of questions to just figure out what the heck's going on. Now, in that situation, there was a competing dissonance here, because also in that period of time when it's not okay for me to spend money on myself, that's reckless, that's, whatever. Also was this, I have to work, and I will work hard because I'm never going to be poor. And work became his salvation, if you will. So picking up a shovel and shoveling out 8 feet of snow, that's no big deal. He's been working since he was 11. He knows how to work, and work is the competing should. I should work. I'm supposed to work. I have to work hard. But it's not okay to spend anything that might help you, because that's impulsive, that's reckless, that's irresponsible. But I can afford a shovel and I have a back. So there's these competing
shoulds, right? And both of them can be causing internal anger.
Oh yeah.
Right? Which can then lead to depression. So even, that's just fascinating because there's so much depression and anxiety that I know of, in my friend group and people that I interact with, and, other areas in my life. It's like, it's amazing how much of it is there. And some of that is simply what you're saying is they're beating themselves, they're shooting themselves too much on some
Right.
things and not asking, why is this so important? And then resolving that.
Yes.
So they'd have more peace so they can turn off at night. Right.
Absolutely
I mean,
right.
we've come
And
in
so
full
that then
circle
they're more
here because that's
productive.
where you were. Can you turn yourself off at night? How easy are you for you to turn off at night and go to sleep? And that's
Turn off and be
indications.
present at dinner with my family, or sit there with my wife, who I'm doing all of this for. I want to do all this for my family so that I can spend time with them, but I come home and I can't turn it off. I can't stop and be with the ones that I'm doing it for. That's a huge indicator that maybe something's out of balance, and maybe something inside is driving a little too much. If we can't spend quality time with the people that we're doing it for anyway, you talk about legacy, we're handing this on, we're building this stuff so that we can better the next generation, but I can't even spend any time with them now, then really what am I doing? What's the purpose?
Right. Absolutely phenomenal. I really have loved this, Brett, talking to you. It's been really great because you've hit so squarely in that center part of what our podcast is all about, is enjoying the wealth. Yeah, we're going to mass wealth, and in the process, however, we've got to be able to enjoy it, or what's the use, right? Have you published a book, or you have a coaching program? There's ways to get a hold of you. I mean, we can put that at the show notes, of course. Is there where would you send people that wanted to know more?
So just real simple, brettjudd.com.
And that's BRTTJUDD, so 2 T's and 2 D's .com. So we'll put that in the show notes, everyone. I'll give you an opportunity real quick, Greg. We always ask our guests to basically manifest or put out to the universe, or however you want to do it, a goal.
Sure.
And also whether that's a 2-year, 5-year goal, whatever. And then invite you, and we wanted to be audacious, right? And then invite you to come back on the podcast and celebrate with us to announce that you've done that. I mean, we have one guy that currently is doing, I think it was, he had 200 million under assets and he wanted to have $1 billion.
Nice.
And I said, cool, man, come. There's another guy that's doing public speaking. He says, I want to speak to an audience of 10, I think it was 100,000 at a time. I said, cool, that's whatever it is. So what would be yours that you want to put out there? And then I want to personally invite you to come back on the podcast and let's celebrate.
Yeah. For me, a huge goal that I would love to have is just, I wanted to have this coaching program to the point that I've got 10, 20 people every month who are driven, who want to make change, who want to live that absolute best life, who are engaged in a group that's pulling together and we're having that fun. I call it the apex effect. I love racing. And so I want to have this group of like-minded people who were coming together, and I'm able to coach them in those life change moments that are able to capitalize on everything and live that absolute best life. For me, I don't know if there's a dollar amount attached to it, but I want to have this group, especially a group of men, because I think we get lost so many times in the grind and the work, that we can have fun and we can realize that there's more to life than what we've locked ourselves into. So the apex effect for me is really something that I would love to see come alive, with an active group of 20 guys focused on becoming their absolute best self for themselves, for their family, for their business. To me, that's something I would love to see within the next year and a half, 2 years.
So 20 guys, there's 20 guys per month that come in new, 20 guys that are constant, ongoing.
Maybe we got some that are phasing out. Maybe we got some new guys coming in.
So a steady state of 20.
Steady state of 20 people.
So let's say when you get to 3 consecutive months of steady state of 20, that will be the goal. That's the end point. So we'll know that's an end point, and you pick up the phone or you message me or whatever and say, Jason, I did it. Schedule me a time to be on the podcast. Great. Let's put it out there. I look forward to that. I really, Brett, based upon, talking to you right now and pushing this out for some of our listeners, I wouldn't be a bit surprised that you hit that goal much sooner than you think. And I'll be excited to talk further about that and come back to some of the ideas we've talked about today. So thanks again, Brett, for being on the podcast.
I appreciate the invitation, Jason.
You bet. Back to you, Scott.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.